My name is Elijah Vance, and at 72 years old, I thought I was done with life's great battles. On Christmas Eve, I prepared a feast for my only son and his wife. They never came. A single photograph on social media showed me where their loyalty truly lay. I sat alone in a silent house, a king in a castle of memories, when a courier delivered an envelope. It didn't contain a holiday card. It contained the legal proof of a secret I had kept for 40 years and the power to reclaim the empire they thought they would inherit. They abandoned their father, but in doing so they handed him a sword. Before I tell you how I used it, please let me know where you're listening to my story from in the comments below. And be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you believe that respect is earned, not inherited. The scent of rosemary and thyme filled my small kitchen, a warm, fragrant cloud that clung to the air like a happy memory. Outside, the Detroit winter was doing its worst, but in here there was only the gentle hum of the oven and the sizzle of the turkey, its skin slowly turning a deep golden brown. Every year, my late wife Sarah used to say that a proper Christmas turkey could solve just about any problem. I ran a hand over the worn oak of the kitchen island, the wood smooth as glass beneath my calloused fingers. I built this island for her the year Marcus was born. Now all that was left of her were the ghosts of these memories and a quiet that was sometimes too loud to bear. The dining table was set for 3. Sarah's finest china, the plates with the little gold rims she only allowed us to use on special occasions, gleamed under the soft light. 3 polished wine glasses stood like soldiers on parade. 2 place settings on one side and one at the head of the table. My place. I adjusted a fork, making it perfectly parallel to the knife beside it. Everything had to be just right. It had been 2 years since Marcus and his wife Ashley had spent Christmas Eve here. Last year, it was a ski trip to Aspen. The year before, a week at a resort in Cancun. But this year was supposed to be different. I could still hear Marcus's voice on the phone from last week, filled with a manufactured warmth that I chose to accept as genuine. Of course, Dad. We'll be there. Christmas is for family. I heard Ashley's faint voice in the background, something about her mother's plans. There was a brief, muffled conversation before Marcus came back on the line, his tone even more resolute. 6 o'clock sharp, Dad. Don't worry, we wouldn't miss it for the world. I held on to those words like a promise. A man my age doesn't have much else to hold on to. Hope becomes a form of currency, and I was spending it all on this one evening. I glanced at the old grandfather clock in the hallway, another piece I had built with my own 2 hands decades ago. Its steady, rhythmic ticking was the heartbeat of the house. It was 4:30. Still plenty of time. I basted the turkey one last time, the rich aroma washing over me. On the counter, a pumpkin pie, Ashley's favorite, was cooling on a wire rack. I had even bought that expensive bottle of wine she liked, a Pinot Noir from Oregon, that cost more than my entire grocery bill for the week. I didn't mind. Seeing her smile, seeing my son happy, that was all the payment I ever needed. For a moment, I let myself believe it. I pictured them walking through the door, shaking the snow from their coats, their faces bright with holiday cheer. I imagined Marcus's strong hug, and even Ashley's polite, slightly distant kiss on the cheek. We would sit at this table, the 3 of us, and for one night the silence would be filled with laughter and conversation, instead of just the ticking of that old clock. We would be a family again, the way we were when Sarah was still here, when the house felt full, and the future seemed like a straight, sunlit road. It was a beautiful picture, a perfect Christmas card moment. But as I stood there lost in the fantasy, a cold sliver of doubt, unwelcome and sharp, pierced through the warmth. It was a feeling I had grown familiar with over the last few years. The quiet whisper that asks, what if the promise is just words? What if the silence is all you have left? 6 o'clock arrived, announced by 6 deep, resonant chimes from the grandfather clock in the hallway. The sound echoed in the empty house, each note a punctuation mark in the thick silence. I sat in my armchair in the living room, the worn fabric familiar and comforting against my back. From where I sat, I could see the dining table perfectly set, waiting. The turkey was resting on the counter, wrapped in foil to keep it warm. The mashed potatoes were in a serving bowl on the stove, a small pool of melted butter slowly hardening on top. Everything was ready. All that was missing were the people. Outside, the sky had turned from a soft gray to a deep, bruised purple. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long, skeletal shadows of the bare trees across my living room floor. I told myself that the roads were probably slick with ice, that the holiday traffic leaving the city was a nightmare. A good son wouldn't want to risk his father worrying. Yes, that had to be it. The clock chimed the three-quarter hour, 6:45. The silence was heavier now, pressing in on me from all sides. This wasn't just late. This was something else entirely. My hand, looking older and more wrinkled than I ever remembered it being, hesitated before picking up my phone from the end table. I scrolled to Marcus's name, the picture of him smiling on a beach somewhere, seeming like a photo of a stranger. My thumb hovered over the call button. I told myself it was fine. He was a busy man, a manager with responsibilities, but the excuses felt thin, like a worn-out blanket that could no longer offer any warmth. I pressed the button. It rang once, a hopeful, piercing sound in the quiet room, twice, and then it went straight to his recorded voice. "Hi, you've reached Marcus. Leave a message." The cheerfulness in his voice, the same cheerful tone he used with clients and strangers, felt like a slap in the face. I cleared my throat, the sound unnaturally loud. "Marcus, it's Dad." I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just calling to see if you two are on your way. The turkeys, it's ready." I hung up before my voice could betray the tremor I felt running through my chest. I had said the turkey was ready, as if the state of a roasted bird was the most important thing. As if I couldn't bring myself to say the truth. "I am ready. I am waiting for you." I stayed in that chair for another 45 minutes, a statue in a cold room, watching the dust motes dance in the lamplight. At precisely 7:30, my phone buzzed on the end table. My heart gave a painful, hopeful leap. It was a text message. But as I put on my reading glasses, my hands fumbling slightly, I saw the name at the top of the screen. It wasn't from Marcus. It was from Ashley. The message was short, brutally efficient, written with the kind of sterile politeness one might use to cancel a dental appointment. "So sorry, Elijah. Marcus got tied up with a last-minute work emergency. We won't be able to make it. Hope you have a lovely Christmas." The words were clean, precise, and utterly devoid of any real feeling. A work emergency. On Christmas Eve. I looked out the window at the silent, snow-covered street. There was no emergency. There was only a choice. And they had made it together. I read the text again and then a third time, as if the words might somehow rearrange themselves into a different meaning. "Hope you have a lovely Christmas." The sentiment was so hollow it was almost cruel. And then the memories started to surface, connecting this moment to so many others I had tried to ignore. I remembered a conversation from last summer sitting on the porch. Ashley had been looking at the rose bushes Sarah had planted. "This is a lot of upkeep for one person," she had said, her voice laced with a concern that didn't reach her eyes. "And the property taxes in this neighborhood must be astronomical." She hadn't called it a home. She called it property. I remembered all the other canceled plans. The Sunday dinners. Marcus was too tired for the fishing trip. He had forgotten about my 72nd birthday that they had celebrated with a gift card sent in the mail. Each instance had come with a plausible excuse, a reasonable explanation. But now, laid out one after another in my mind, they formed a clear and undeniable pattern. This wasn't a series of unfortunate events. It was a strategy, a slow, methodical campaign of disengagement. I was being managed, phased out of my own son's life. The delicious aroma of rosemary and thyme that had filled my home just hours ago now seemed cloying and sickening, the smell of waste and broken promises. I stayed there at the head of the table, the plate of cooling food in front of me, a feast for a ghost. The two empty chairs across from me weren't just vacant spaces anymore. They were accusations. They spoke of my failure, of my foolish, stubborn hope that love could be summoned like a dog to a whistle. The silence in the house had changed too. It was no longer a peaceful quiet. It had become a presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered every other sound. I could feel the weight of every unspoken word, every broken promise pressing down on me. My grief was a physical thing, a heavy stone of sorrow lodged deep in my chest. I felt like a fool, a 72-year-old man who had spent an entire day cooking and cleaning and hoping only to be dismissed with a bloodless two-sentence text message. With methodical, deliberate movements, I picked up my plate. The china felt heavy and brittle in my hands. For one wild, fleeting moment, I wanted to stand up and hurl it against the wall, to hear it shatter into 1,000 pieces, to create a sound loud enough to drown out the oppressive silence. But I didn't. That wasn't my way. My Sarah, she had always said my strength was in my stillness, in my patience. Anger, she'd once told me while we were patching a leak in the roof on a hot summer day, is a fire. It can forge steel, or it can burn your whole house down. The choice of what it does, Eli, is up to the man who holds it. I carried the plate into the kitchen and scraped the entire untouched meal into the trash can. The sound of the perfectly cooked food hitting the bottom of the bin was obscene, a testament to a love that had not been returned. I walked back into the living room, my steps feeling heavy on the hardwood floors I had laid myself 40 years ago. My eyes fell upon the mantelpiece above the fireplace. There were several framed photos there, a small collection of frozen moments from a life mostly lived. My gaze settled on one in particular. It was a picture of Sarah and me taken the day we closed on this plot of land. We weren't in the picture so much as the house was, or rather the skeleton of the house. We were standing in the half-finished frame of what would become our living room sawdust, and our hair smiles on our faces so wide and bright they could have lit up the entire construction site. We were young, strong, and we were building our future with our own two hands. I remembered Sarah's expression that day, a look of fierce, unshakable determination. She had looked at me, her eyes sparkling, and said, "We're not just building a house, Eli. We're building a legacy, something that will stand long after we're gone. Don't you ever let anyone treat it like it's just wood and nails." Looking at her face, her vibrant, smiling face, something inside me shifted. The heavy stone of grief in my chest didn't disappear, but it began to change its shape. It solidified, its soft, aching edges hardening into something sharp and defined. The sadness was still there, but it was being overshadowed by a different emotion, an emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel for a very long time. It was the anger she had spoken of. A cold, clear, controlled anger. It was the quiet fury of a creator seeing his creation disrespected. It was the righteous indignation of a husband defending his wife's memory. They hadn't just abandoned me on Christmas Eve, they had disrespected Sarah's legacy. They had looked at this home, this monument to our love and hard work, and saw nothing more than property, wood and nails. In the profound, crushing silence of that Christmas Eve, I knew I wouldn't let that fire burn my house down. I would use it. I would let it temper me. I stood up from my chair, my back straight, the aches and pains of my age momentarily forgotten. I walked past the mocking dining table and into the small study off the living room. It was Sarah's old office, and I had kept it exactly as she'd left it. I sat down in her chair and opened the bottom drawer of her heavy oak desk. My fingers brushed past old photo albums and stacks of letters until they found what I was looking for, a thick, leather-bound ledger. It felt heavy and important in my hands. I placed it on the desk and opened it. The pages were filled with Sarah's neat, precise handwriting columns of numbers and notes dating back decades. They thought I was just a retired old carpenter, a relic. They had forgotten who my wife was. They had forgotten who we were together. And I decided right then and there that it was time for me to remind them. Christmas morning dawned, cold and gray, the sky the color of old dishwater. I had not slept. I had spent the night in Sarah's office, the open ledger on the desk in front of me, the ticking of the grandfather clock counting down the seconds of my long, dark vigil. The house felt different, as if the very air had grown thin and brittle. The warmth from the night before was gone, replaced by a deep, penetrating chill that had nothing to do with the winter outside. I began the task of cleaning up. I took the fine china from the dining table, washing and drying each piece with a mechanical precision that required no thought. I packed away the untouched food into plastic containers, my movements stiff and robotic. Each container felt like a small coffin filled with the remains of a hope I had allowed myself to have. Scraping the last of the pumpkin pie into the trash felt like a final act of surrender. I was erasing the evidence of my own foolishness. Just as I was wiping down the countertops, the doorbell rang, a cheerful, jarring sound in the oppressive silence. I opened it to find my neighbor from across the street, Mrs. Gable, holding a plate covered in plastic wrap. She was a kind woman with a warm, wrinkled smile. "Merry Christmas, Elijah," she said, handing me the plate. "I made far too many gingerbread cookies as usual. Thought you might like some." I forced a smile that felt tight and unnatural on my face. "That's very kind of you, Beatrice. Thank you." Her eyes were full of a genuine warmth that made the stone in my chest ache even more. "You have a good day, you hear," she said before turning to walk back across the snowy street. I closed the door and leaned against it, the plate of cookies feeling impossibly heavy in my hands. The kindness of a near stranger was a stark and painful contrast to the cruelty of my own blood. I made myself a cup of black coffee and sat down at the kitchen table with Mrs. Gable's cookies. I decided the least I could do was thank her properly. I opened the tablet Marcus had given me for my birthday 2 years ago, a device I rarely used, and logged onto my Facebook account. I found Beatrice's page, and was typing out a short thank you message when a new post appeared at the top of my feed. It was from Ashley's mother, a woman named Carol, who I had met only a handful of times. She had tagged Ashley in the post, which was why it had appeared on my screen. The post was a photograph, a bright, happy, festive photograph. And it stopped my heart cold. There they were, Marcus and Ashley standing in a lavishly decorated living room I didn't recognize, a towering Christmas tree covered in glittering ornaments behind them. They were surrounded by Ashley's family, all of them smiling, holding glasses of champagne. Ashley was wearing a sparkling red dress, her arm linked through my son's. And Marcus was beaming. He was looking at the camera with a wide, carefree smile, a smile I had not seen on his face in years. He looked relaxed, happy, and utterly without a single shred of guilt. On the table in front of them was a feast that made my own humble efforts look pathetic. A huge honey-glazed ham sat at the center, surrounded by dozens of side dishes. The caption beneath the photo, written by Ashley's mother, read, "Nothing better than having the whole family together for Christmas, so blessed to have my wonderful son-in-law with us." I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hands. The sounds of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, all of it faded away into a dull roar in my ears. The pain I had felt the night before, that deep, aching grief, was suddenly gone. It had been flash-frozen, transformed in an instant into something else. It was an anger so pure and so cold it felt like ice flowing through my veins. The lie was one thing, the abandonment was another. But this public performance of happiness, this celebration built on a foundation of their deceit, this was an unbearable insult. This was them dancing on the grave of my love for them. I zoomed in on my son's smiling face, searching for something, anything, a flicker of regret, a shadow of conflict in his eyes. There was nothing. Only the placid, contented look of a man who had made his choice and was perfectly happy with it. That was the moment, the final breaking moment. The last drop of water had fallen, and the vessel of my patience, which I had thought was bottomless, was finally irrevocably full. I closed the tablet and the screen going dark, but the image of my son's smiling face was burned onto the back of my eyelids. In that moment, I felt a profound and complete detachment, as if a final thread connecting my heart to my son had been snipped clean through. The man in that photograph was a stranger to me, and I owed him nothing. Just as that thought settled into my mind, cold and solid as stone, the doorbell rang. The sound so soon after the one that had announced Mrs. Gable's kindness now felt like a summons, a call to action from the universe itself. I moved from the kitchen, my steps steady, my purpose clear. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could see the silhouette of a young man in a uniform. I opened it to a courier, a kid no older than 20, his face red from the cold, a handheld scanner in his gloved hand. "Package for Elijah Vance," he said, his breath fogging in the air. "Need a signature." He held out a large, stiff manila envelope. It was not a package. It was a document. I signed the screen with the provided stylus, my signature, a firm, unwavering line. He handed me the envelope, and with a quick, "Have a good one," he was gone, jogging back to his truck, oblivious to the fact that he had just delivered the weapon I would use to go to war. I closed the door, the deadbolt sliding home with a heavy, final thud. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, just holding the envelope. It was heavier than it should have been. The return address was for a law firm downtown Miller, Chen, and Jordan. The name meant nothing to me. My own lawyer had retired years ago, and my will was simple, straightforward. I had no dealings with any firm called Miller, Chen, and Jordan. My first thought was that it was a mistake. My second was that it was some kind of legal trouble, perhaps related to the property taxes Ashley was so concerned about. I felt a flicker of the old anxiety, the worry of a man who has always paid his bills on time and lived an honest life. But the cold resolve that had settled in my soul pushed the fear away. I carried the envelope not to the kitchen table, the site of my humiliation, but back into Sarah's study, the site of my decision. I sat down at her oak desk, the open ledger still lying where I had left it. I picked up the silver letter opener Sarah had used for years and slit the envelope open with a single precise slice. The sound of the paper tearing was the only sound in the room. I pulled out a sheaf of papers held together by a simple metal clip. The top page was a cover letter printed on heavy, expensive stationery. "Dear Mr. Vance," it began. "Please find enclosed the fourth quarter financial summary for VNS Premier Designs along with your quarterly disbursement check as majority shareholder. We trust you will find everything in order. Sincerely, Imani Jordan, Jr. Partner. The name clicked into place. Imani Jordan. That was Charlie Jordan's daughter. Charlie had been my best friend since we were boys, the best man at my wedding. He had been a lawyer too before he passed. His daughter had followed in his footsteps. It was his firm. But that wasn't what held my attention. It was the other name. V&S Premier Designs. I shuffled the cover letter to the back, revealing the next document. It was a multi-page financial report dense with charts, graphs, and columns of numbers. But my eyes were fixed on the name at the top of every page. V for Vance, S for Sullivan, Sarah's maiden name, our company. I flipped through the pages, seeing the numbers that represented a lifetime of hard work. Profits were up, margins were healthy. The business we had built from nothing in the garage behind this very house was thriving. Then I saw the last document at the bottom of the stack. It was a check. I pulled it out from under the clip. It was printed on the same heavy watermarked paper as the letterhead. My name was printed neatly in the center, Elijah Vance. And below it in the box where the amount was written were the words that changed everything. $472,550. I stared at the number, not with shock, but with a kind of grim, detached affirmation. This wasn't a lottery ticket. This wasn't a surprise inheritance. This was the fruit of my labor. My legacy. Sarah's legacy. I remembered the day we decided to structure the company this way. We were young, ambitious, and black in an industry dominated by old white families. We knew our craftsmanship was second to none, but we also knew the world we lived in. So we made a strategic choice. We found a partner, Ashley's father, a good salesman with a known name, and made him the public face, the CEO. We gave him a generous salary and a minority stake. But Sarah, my brilliant, far-sighted Sarah, she made sure we retained 65% of the company through a privately held trust. We lived off a modest salary, pouring every spare dollar back into the business, growing it slowly, carefully out of the spotlight. We lived in our small, comfortable house, not because we were poor, but because we understood that true wealth wasn't about what you showed to the world. It was about what you secretly controlled. Marcus and Ashley, in their desperate clamor for the value of my house, had been fighting over a few scraps from the table, completely oblivious to the feast I owned in the kitchen. I laid the check down on the desk, right on top of Sarah's open ledger. The crisp, modern document lay upon the old, handwritten pages. The past and the present, my history and my future, all right there in front of me. The cold resolve in my heart now had a name. It was power. The power to protect what Sarah and I had built. The power to teach a lesson that was long overdue. The question was no longer what I should do. The question was how. And looking at the name on the letterhead, Imani Jordan, I knew exactly who I needed to call. I sat there in the quiet of Sarah's study, the dividend check lying on top of the old ledger like a modern postscript to a timeless story. The man who had cooked a feast for an empty table the night before was gone. The man who had waited by the phone, hoping for a call that would never come, had vanished. In their place sat someone else, someone I had not been for a very long time. The grief and the pain were still there, I suppose buried deep inside me, but they were no longer in control. They had been transformed, compressed by the immense pressure of my sorrow and my anger into something hard and clear like a diamond. And I now had a purpose. The fog of sadness had lifted, revealing a path forward, a path paved with the cold, hard facts of legal documents and majority shares. I thought of Imani Jordan. I remembered her as a little girl, all pigtails and bright, intelligent eyes, running around her father's office while Charlie and I discussed business or just life. Charlie had been so proud of her when she passed the bar exam, telling me she had a mind like a steel trap and a heart full of integrity just like her mother. She's a fighter, Eli. He had told me not long before he passed. She'll do right by people. I held on to that thought. I was about to entrust her with the fight of my life. This wasn't about simple revenge anymore. Revenge was a messy, emotional act. This was about restoring order. It was about justice. It was about honoring the woman who had helped me build an empire and protecting that empire from the shallow, grasping hands of those who didn't understand the first thing about its true value. My movements were deliberate, without a hint of the hesitation that had plagued me for years. I picked up the phone, my hand as steady as the oak desk beneath it. I found the number for the law firm on the letterhead and dialed. A polite, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Miller, Chen and Jordan, how may I direct your call?" Her voice was crisp and efficient. I felt a lifetime away from the man who had left a trembling message on his son's voicemail just last night. "I would like to speak with Imani Jordan," I said, my own voice low and even, carrying a weight of authority that surprised even me. "May I ask who is calling?" the receptionist inquired. "My name is Elijah Vance," I stated simply. There was a brief pause, then a click, and a new voice came on the line. "This is Imani Jordan." She sounded sharp, focused, and busy. "Hello, Ms. Jordan," I began. "You may not remember me, but my name is Elijah Vance. Your father, Charlie, was my best friend." The line went silent for a beat. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, connecting my name to the stories her father must have told her. When she spoke again, the professional coolness in her voice had been replaced by a note of warm curiosity. "Mr. Vance," she said. "Of course. My father spoke of you often. It's an honor to hear from you. How can I help you?" I did not waste time with pleasantries. I went straight to the point. "I need to schedule a meeting with you," I said, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. "It is a matter of some urgency regarding my holdings in a private corporation." "Of course," she replied. "It's Christmas Day, but I can certainly have my assistant find some time for you next week." I cut her off, not rudely, but with a firmness that made my intentions clear. "Tomorrow morning would be preferable," I stated. 9 o'clock. "I assure you, Ms. Jordan, it will be worth your while to reschedule whatever you may have planned." There was another brief silence. I had not asked. I had told her. I was no longer a supplicant. I was a majority shareholder giving an instruction. "All right, Mr. Vance," she said finally, a newfound respect in her voice. 9 o'clock it is. My office. There is one more thing," I added, my eyes falling on Sarah's ledger. "I will need you to bring the original incorporation documents for VNS Premier Designs, along with a complete and current list of all shareholders and their voting rights. I trust you have access to the corporate safe." Now the silence on the other end of the line was profound. I knew what she was thinking. A routine request for a meeting had just turned into a corporate power play. "I will have them ready," she said, her voice now all business. "Very good," I replied. "I look forward to meeting you, Imani." I ended the call without saying goodbye. I placed the phone back on its cradle with a soft, definitive click. I leaned back in Sarah's chair and looked at the photo on the mantelpiece again. I was not just mourning her anymore. I was finally continuing her work. The game had begun. The next morning I drove my old pickup truck into the heart of downtown Detroit. The city looked different than it had the day before. The familiar skyline of steel and glass no longer seemed intimidating. It looked like a forest, a landscape of power, and for the first time in a long time I felt like I belonged there. I parked in an underground garage, the rumbling engine of my truck echoing in the clean, quiet concrete space, a stark contrast to the sleek, silent electric cars parked in the surrounding bays. The offices of Miller, Chen, and Jordan were on the 35th floor of a gleaming skyscraper that pierced the gray winter sky. As I stepped out of the elevator, I was met with a panorama of the city spread out below a view that cost more than my house was worth. The receptionist led me to a large corner office, and a young woman stood up from behind a large mahogany desk to greet me. She was tall and poised, dressed in a sharply tailored suit, but her eyes were her father's. They were kind, intelligent, and held a spark of the same fierce loyalty I had known in my old friend. "Mr. Vance," she said, extending a hand. "Imani Jordan. It's an honor to finally meet you." Her handshake was firm, confident. "The honor is mine, Imani," I replied. "You've grown into a fine young woman." Charlie would be bursting with pride. A brief warm smile touched her lips before she turned professional again. "Please have a seat. I've had the documents you requested brought to the conference room." She led me to an adjoining room where a long, polished table reflected the city lights. In the center of the table was a neat stack of folders and leather-bound binders. She had been prepared. That was good. We sat down opposite each other. "My father told me you were one of the most honest and hard-working men he ever knew." She began, her gaze direct. "He also told me you were one of the smartest, so when you called yesterday, I knew this was not a small matter." I nodded slowly, my eyes on the binders. "Your father was a good man," I said. "He was also a brilliant lawyer. He helped my wife and me structure something 40 years ago, something I now need to protect." I opened my hands on the table, a gesture of transparency. Sarah, my late wife, and I started a business in my garage. We made furniture. Not just tables and chairs, but works of art. We poured our souls into the grain of the wood. But back then, the world was a different place. Getting the kind of high-end contracts we needed. It was difficult for a company with a black man's name on the front door. Imani listened, her focus absolute, her hands steepled in front of her. She understood immediately. "So you brought in a partner," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "Exactly," I confirmed. "A man named Robert Sterling, Ashley's father. He was a gifted salesman, a white man who could open doors we couldn't. We made him the CEO, the public face of the operational company Sterling Fine Furnishings. But the real ownership, the real control, was held by a private parent company Sarah and I formed, V&S Holdings." I tapped the top binder. Sarah was brilliant. She structured it so that V&S owned all the designs, all the patents, and 65% of the entire enterprise. Robert owned a minority stake and was paid a handsome salary to be the front man. We lived simply, reinvesting our profits, growing our legacy in the shadows, by choice. Imani nodded, her expression grim. "I've reviewed the charter documents this morning, Mr. Vance. It's exactly as you say. Ironclad. Your position as majority shareholder of the holding company is absolute and unquestionable." She paused, then leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping, which is what makes my next piece of information so disturbing. "Your call yesterday prompted me to look into any recent inquiries regarding the V&S Trust. An inquiry was made just last month, a preliminary request for evaluation of Mr. Sterling's minority shares." My blood ran cold. I knew what was coming. I remained silent, letting her continue. "The inquiry came from a financial advisor on behalf of a private party," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "A party seeking to secure a private loan from Robert Sterling himself. After some digging this morning, I was able to ascertain the identity of that private party." She let the silence hang in the air for a moment. "It was your son Marcus and his wife Ashley." The words spoken in the sterile quiet of the conference room landed with the force of a physical blow. But my face remained a mask of calm. The storm was all on the inside. Imani continued, laying out the full sickening scope of their betrayal. "From what I've pieced together, their plan was as follows. They intended to have you declared unable to manage your own affairs, place you in an assisted living facility, and sell your house." She slid a piece of paper across the table. "It was an informal property appraisal for my address dated 3 weeks ago. They planned to use the expected proceeds from the sale of your home as collateral for the loan from Mr. Sterling. That loan in turn would be used to purchase a larger portion of his minority stake in the company. They were leveraging your home, your legacy with your wife, to buy into the very company they didn't even know you owned. They were planning to use your past to finance a future they felt you were holding them back from." So that was it, the full, ugly truth. It wasn't just about getting rid of the old man. It was a hostile takeover funded by my own life's work. They weren't just ungrateful. They were predatory. They saw me as nothing more than a barrier between them and the life they thought they deserved. Imani watched me, her expression a mixture of professional anger and personal sympathy. "Mr. Vance," she said softly. "Elijah, this is a profound betrayal. What do you want to do?" I looked past her out the window at the sprawling city. For 40 years I had stayed in the shadows, content to let my work speak for itself. For the past few years I had allowed myself to be diminished, to be made small by my own son. No more. I turned my gaze back to Imani, and for the first time I let the cold, hard steel in my soul show in my eyes. "I want you to call a full meeting of the board of V&S Holdings." I said, my voice low and steady. "It is time for a formal review of the company's ownership and leadership. It's time for the founder to come out of retirement." I left Imani Jordan's office feeling like a man reborn. The weight that had settled on my shoulders over the past few years, the slow creeping sense of obsolescence and grief, had been lifted. In its place was a feeling I hadn't known since Sarah and I first laid the foundations of our business, the exhilarating, clarifying power of pure purpose. Driving home, the city no longer looked like a cold, indifferent landscape of steel. It looked like my kingdom, a kingdom I had built in secret and then foolishly neglected. I had allowed weeds to grow in my garden, and now it was time to pull them out by the roots. The first step in my plan was the most difficult and yet the simplest. It was silence. A complete, absolute, and weaponized silence. When I got home, I saw my phone blinking on the kitchen counter. There were 3 missed calls from Marcus and a series of text messages. I picked up the phone, my hand steady, my heart calm. The first text from late the previous afternoon read, "Hey Dad, just checking in. Hope you had a nice Christmas." The hypocrisy was so blatant it was almost comical. The next one from that morning was more direct. "Dad, haven't heard from you. Is everything okay? Please call me." The final message sent just an hour ago had an edge of impatient entitlement to it. "Dad, Ashley and I really need to talk to you about something important regarding the house. It's about securing our future. Please get back to us." Securing their future. They wanted to talk to me about securing their future by dismantling my past. A year ago, those messages would have sent me into a spiral of worry and guilt. I would have called back immediately, apologizing for not being available, eager to please to fix whatever problem they had. But now I simply read the words and a cold smile touched my lips. I saw the messages for what they were, the nervous prodding of a pair of thieves checking to see if the homeowner was still asleep. I set the phone down on the counter, screen side down. I would not be replying. My silence would be my first move. Let them wonder, let them grow anxious, and then let that anxiety curdle into overconfidence as the days passed without a word from the old man. An enemy who thinks you are weak and unresponsive is an enemy who walks carelessly. The next few days were a masterclass in legal precision orchestrated by Imani with the skill of a seasoned general. She worked quickly and quietly. Following my instructions, she drafted a formal notice citing Section 4, Paragraph B of the VNS Holdings corporate bylaws, a clause Sarah herself had insisted upon, which gave the majority shareholder the unilateral right to call an extraordinary meeting of the board of directors. The stated purpose of the meeting was deliberately vague and filled with impenetrable corporate jargon: to conduct a comprehensive review of executive leadership performance, to reevaluate current corporate governance protocols, and to discuss long-term strategic capital allocation. It was a document that radiated power while revealing nothing. It was a declaration of war disguised as a quarterly report. Imani didn't send the notice to me. She didn't send it to Marcus. She sent it via a bonded courier directly to the office of the CEO of Sterling Fine Furnishings, Robert Sterling. That was the most crucial part of the trap. The summons had to come from a source they trusted. Robert, as the public face and CEO, would receive the notice from the parent company's legal counsel. He would see it as a legitimate, if unusual, corporate command. He would have no reason to suspect that the old man, his daughter, and son-in-law were so eager to put in a home was the one pulling the strings. He would be the unwitting instrument of his own daughter's downfall. He would be the one to deliver the invitation to the execution. A few days later, Imani called me. "The notice has been received," she said, her voice calm and professional. "The meeting is set for next Tuesday at 10 a.m. in the main conference room at the VNS headquarters." I felt a quiet thrill. "And Mr. Sterling's reaction?" I asked. "Confusion mostly," Imani replied. "He called me to confirm the notice was legitimate. He seemed a bit flustered, worried that the holding company was unhappy with his performance. I assured him it was a high-level strategic review. He bought it completely. He confirmed he would inform his senior management team, which includes Marcus." I closed my eyes. The trap was set. The bait was laid. And the prey was about to be led to the slaughter by their own trusted guide. That evening, I drove past the VNS Premier Design showroom downtown. The windows were lit up, showcasing beautiful handcrafted pieces of furniture. My designs, Sarah's designs. I wasn't looking at them with nostalgia anymore. I was looking at them as a king surveying the territory he was about to reclaim. The pieces were in place. The long, silent years of my retirement were over. I was no longer waiting. I was hunting. While I spent my days in the quiet company of my workshop sanding down a piece of cherry wood until it was as smooth as river stone, the next act of my little drama was unfolding across town. Imani, through her network of contacts and a few discreet inquiries, was later able to paint a very clear picture for me of what happened next. And it was a scene of hubris so profound, so breathtakingly arrogant, that it almost defied belief. The scene as I picture it took place in Marcus and Ashley's apartment, a place I had only visited once. It was a sterile environment of white walls, gray furniture, and cold glass surfaces, a home that felt more like a corporate lobby than a place where a family lived. It was there that they received the call that would seal their fate. The call came from Robert Sterling, Ashley's father. Imani told me he sounded flustered, confused, a man who felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, but didn't know why. I can imagine Ashley putting the phone on speaker, her expression sharp and analytical, while Marcus hovered nervously behind her. V&S Holdings just called an extraordinary board meeting for next Tuesday morning. Robert's voice crackled through the speaker. The notice came from their legal counsel. Something about a comprehensive review of executive leadership. I've never seen anything like it. They want the entire senior team there. That includes you, Marcus. I need you both in that room. I can picture the moment of silence after he hung up. Marcus, always the worrier, probably saw it as a threat. A leadership review. What does that mean? Are we in some kind of trouble? But Ashley? Ashley would have seen it as an invitation. Her eyes would have lit up with raw, naked ambition. I can almost hear her sharp, dismissive laugh. Trouble, Marcus. You're not seeing the board for the pieces. This isn't a threat. It's a golden opportunity handed to us on a silver platter. She would have paced their minimalist living room, her mind racing, connecting the dots in a way that served only her own narrative. Don't you see the holding company is getting restless? Strategic review is just corporate code for, we're looking for a new direction, and we are going to give it to them. Her confidence would have been infectious, easily overwhelming Marcus's weak-willed anxiety. Our plan, she would have continued, her voice electric with excitement, the one we were going to propose to your father. We take it straight to the top. We'll show them we're not just middle managers, we're visionaries. The conversation they had that night as they prepared for the meeting of their lives was a symphony of condescension. They spoke of me as if I were already a ghost. The old man still hasn't called back. Marcus would have said, a flicker of guilt quickly extinguished by Ashley's pragmatism. It's for the best, she would have replied, waving a dismissive hand. It proves our point. He's checked out, incapable of managing his own affairs, let alone a valuable asset like that house. It makes the whole process cleaner. We can tell the board we have a clear plan for capital liquidation to fund our share acquisition. They likely stayed up late that night creating charts and presentations, practicing their speeches in front of a mirror. They were no longer just trying to sell my house. They were preparing to perform a hostile takeover of my legacy, using the fantasy of my home's value as their primary weapon. They were so blinded by their own ambition, so certain of my weakness and their own brilliance, that they never once stopped to ask the most important question: who exactly had called this meeting? Why now? They saw a door swinging open to their glorious future, and they were too arrogant, too greedy to see that it was the door to a cage that I had built with my own hands using the finest materials, their own disrespect, their own disloyalty, and their own boundless, beautiful arrogance. And as they prepared their speeches, I was at home preparing my verdict. The boardroom was on the top floor, a cathedral of corporate power. A single massive table made from a slab of polished mahogany ran the length of the room, so dark and glossy it looked like a frozen lake at midnight. It was a piece I had designed myself 30 years ago. On the far wall, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a sprawling kingdom of concrete and ambition. Imani and I had arrived an hour early. I wanted to feel the room to reacquaint myself with the heart of the empire I had built from the shadows. I chose the chair at the head of the table, a large, high-backed leather throne that was the seat of the chairman. It felt right. It felt like coming home. Imani sat to my right, a neat stack of files and binders in front of her, her expression calm and focused. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The plan was in motion. All we had to do was wait for the actors to take their places on the stage. At precisely 10 o'clock, I heard their voices in the hallway. They were laughing. The sound was bright, confident, and utterly out of place, like the chatter of school children outside a funeral home. My hands rested on the cool, smooth wood of the table. I did not feel anger. I did not feel nervousness. I felt a profound and complete stillness, a sense of clarity so absolute it was almost peaceful. I was no longer the grieving husband or the abandoned father. I was the founder. I was the majority shareholder, and I was here to protect my legacy. The heavy glass door swung open. Ashley entered first, of course. She was a vision of corporate ambition, dressed in a sharp pantsuit, a tablet held in her hand like a shield. She had a bright, predatory smile on her face, the smile of a winner who had come to claim her prize. Marcus followed a step behind her, trying to match her confident stride, a briefcase clutched in his hand. He looked like a boy wearing his father's suit, eager to prove he belonged in the world of adults. And finally, Robert Sterling, Ashley's father, and my CEO walked in, his expression one of mild professional curiosity. They were a united front, a conquering army ready to present their grand vision. Their eyes scanned the room, expecting to see a panel of anonymous board members from the holding company. And then their collective gaze traveled to the head of the table, and they saw me. The moment stretched into an eternity. It was as if I had hit a pause button on their entire world. The confident smile on Ashley's face didn't just fade, it shattered like a reflection in a broken mirror. Her mouth fell slightly open, her eyes wide with a confusion so profound it bordered on panic. Her mind, so quick and calculating, was firing blanks, utterly unable to process the impossible image in front of her. The old man who was supposed to be sitting alone in a dusty house was sitting in the chairman's seat of her family's company. My son Marcus stopped so abruptly that his father-in-law nearly walked into him. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly gray. His briefcase slipped from his nerveless fingers and hit the plush carpet with a soft, muffled thud. He looked at me as if he was seeing a ghost. Or worse, as if he was seeing his father truly seeing me for the very first time. He saw not the feeble retired carpenter he had chosen to abandon, but a figure of immense and inexplicable authority. Robert Sterling's reaction was different. He was a businessman. His confusion was immediately replaced by a dawning professional horror. He recognized the power dynamics of a boardroom. He knew what it meant for someone to be sitting in that chair. He looked from me to his daughter, his expression a frantic, silent question. The silence in the room was absolute. The laughter from the hallway was a distant, mocking echo. They stood there frozen, three statues of shattered arrogance. I let them stand there for a full 10 seconds, letting the cold, hard reality of the situation sink into their bones. I let them feel the complete and total loss of control. Then I broke the silence. My voice was not loud. It was quiet, calm, and carried to every corner of the room. Robert, Marcus, Ashley, thank you for coming. I gestured to the empty chairs on the far side of the table. Please have a seat. We have a great deal to discuss. My words, simple and polite, were a demonstration of absolute power. I was not a guest here. I was the host. And they did as they were told, moving toward the chairs with the stiff, robotic movements of people in a trance. Their grand presentation was forgotten. Their ambitious plan was dead. They were no longer conquerors. They were defendants, and the trial was about to begin. They sat stiff and silent in the expensive leather chairs. The confidence they had walked in with had evaporated, leaving behind a thick, palpable atmosphere of dread. They looked like defendants in a trial they didn't know they were attending. I let the silence stretch for a moment longer, then I cleared my throat. The small sound was like a gavel striking wood, calling the room to order. Thank you all for being here on such short notice. I began, my voice even and calm. I looked at each of them in turn, my gaze lingering for a moment on my son, who refused to meet my eyes. This is a meeting of the Board of Directors for V&S Holdings. As the founder and majority shareholder, I have called this meeting to order. I will now cede the floor to my legal counsel, Ms. Imani Jordan. The words founder and majority shareholder hit them like a physical blow. Ashley flinched as if she'd been struck. Robert's face went a shade paler. Marcus just sank lower in his chair. Imani stood up, a figure of calm professional authority. She nodded to me, then turned her attention to the three of them. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her words were precise, unemotional, and as sharp as surgical steel. Good morning, she said, her eyes sweeping over them. As counsel for the majority shareholder, my purpose today is to clarify the ownership structure of this company and to address a recent proposal that has come to our attention. She picked up a remote, and a large screen on the wall flickered to life. On it was a high-resolution scan of a document. Before you is the original articles of incorporation for V&S Holdings filed 40 years ago, Imani stated. Her laser pointer circled two names listed under the section titled Founding Partners and Principal Shareholders. As you can see, the founding partners were Elijah Vance and Sarah Sullivan Vance, who together retained a 65% controlling interest in the company, an interest which Mr. Vance now solely controls. That's impossible, Ashley hissed, finding her voice. It was thin and reedy. This company belongs to my family. My father built it. Imani didn't even look at her. She simply advanced to the next slide, which showed the incorporation documents for Sterling Fine Furnishings. Mr. Sterling Amani said, her voice cutting through the tension, built a very successful operational company for which he was compensated with a 20% minority stake and a generous salary. V&S Holdings, however, has always been the parent company retaining ownership of all assets, patents, and designs. Robert Sterling said nothing. He simply stared at the screen, his face a mask of resignation. He knew it was the truth. He had lived that truth for 40 years. Imani let the weight of that revelation settle in the room before she moved on to her next point. Now let's address the recent proposal. Her voice took on an even colder, more clinical tone. It has come to the attention of the majority shareholder that a plan was being formulated by certain members of the Sterling executive team to secure a private loan against a personal asset belonging to a third party. She looked directly at Marcus and Ashley. An asset, specifically the residential property located at 245 Oakmont Drive, my address. Marcus visibly recoiled as if burned. Imani continued, her voice relentless. We have records of an informal property appraisal conducted 3 weeks ago. We are also aware of preliminary discussions with Mr. Sterling regarding a loan, the collateral for which would be the projected proceeds from the sale of that house after its owner, Mr. Vance, had been moved into an assisted living facility. The room was dead silent. The shame was a physical presence so thick I could almost taste it. Ashley's face was now a blotchy, furious red, a mixture of utter humiliation and impotent rage. This was her grand plan, her brilliant strategy, and it was being dissected and laid bare like a dead animal on a laboratory table. My son, my Marcus, had his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. He was not looking at anyone. He was a man completely broken, shattered by the public exposure of his own profound weakness and disloyalty. The stated purpose of this loan, Imani concluded, her voice like a final nail in a coffin, was to acquire a larger portion of Mr. Sterling's minority shares. In essence, the plan was to leverage Mr. Vance's home, a home he built with his late wife, to fund a hostile takeover of a company you didn't even know he owned. Imani sat down. Her work was done. She had presented the facts, clear, undeniable, and devastating. The silence that followed was the silence of a tomb. It was then that I spoke. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I looked at Ashley, at Robert, and finally my eyes settled on my son, who slowly raised his head, his face streaked with tears. That house. I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, is not an asset. It is not property. It is a library of memories. It is the place where I brought my wife home for the first time, and the place where I held my son for the first time. It was built with love and with the kind of hope you can only have when you're young and building a future. This company, I gestured around the room, was not built to make us rich. It was built to make us free. Free to create, free to build a life on our own terms with honor and integrity. I looked straight at Marcus, then father to son. You were born into that legacy. You were born into that freedom. And you were so desperate to trade it all away for a handful of money and a house I would have given you anyway if you had only asked with love instead of plotting with greed. I stood up, my chair sliding back silently on the plush carpet. This meeting is over. Ms. Jordan will be in contact with all of you regarding the necessary next steps for the transition in leadership. I turned and walked toward the door, leaving them to drown in the ruins of their own ambition. The silence in the room was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Imani had laid the truth bare, and there was nowhere for them to hide. Ashley sat rigid in her chair, her face a mask of cold, humiliated fury. Robert Sterling looked like a man who had aged a decade, in the last 10 minutes his legacy as a CEO crumbling to dust around him. But my eyes were on my son. Marcus finally looked up at me, his face a ruin of shame and disbelief. It was to him I spoke, my voice quiet, not with anger, but with the heavy finality of a closing door. You saw a house, I said, my voice resonating in the quiet room. A collection of wood and nails and property taxes. You never saw the place where your mother and I danced in the kitchen after we signed the loan papers. You never saw the pencil marks on the door frame where we measured your height every year on your birthday. You weren't trying to sell a house, Marcus. You were trying to sell my memories. I let the words hang in the air before continuing. And this company, I gestured to the opulent room around us. You saw it as a machine that prints money. You saw shares to be acquired, power to be consolidated. You never saw the splinters in my hands or the exhaustion in your mother's eyes after a 16-hour day. You never understood that the true value of this company isn't in its quarterly earnings, but in the integrity we poured into every single piece we built. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze locked on my son's. I would have given you anything. The house would have been yours. I would have helped you financially in any way you needed. All you ever had to do was come to me as a son with love and respect. But you chose to come as a thief with appraisals and lawyers and secrets. You stood by and allowed your wife to treat your father's home as an asset to be liquidated, and you called it a plan for your future. I shook my head, a slow, sad gesture of finality. A legacy isn't an inheritance you receive when someone dies. It's a standard of honor you uphold while they are living. You have failed to uphold it. Therefore, you have no claim to it. I stood up my chair, sliding back silently on the carpet. The meeting was over. The verdict had been delivered. Robert, I said, my voice now firm and clear, you have failed in your fiduciary duty to this company and its primary shareholders. Ms. Jordan will be in contact with your lawyer to discuss the terms of your severance. Then I looked at the two people who had broken my heart. As for you two, you are no longer employees of this company in any capacity, and you are no longer welcome in my home. I turned my back on them then and walked toward the far windows looking out over the city. I did not need to watch them leave. I heard the scrape of chairs, the soft thud of a briefcase being picked up, and the silent, heavy footsteps of their retreat. I heard the quiet click of the boardroom door closing behind them, a sound of absolute and deserved finality. The war was over. The weeks that followed the board meeting were a whirlwind of change and necessary storm to clear the air. As chairman of the board of V&S Holdings, I guided the company back to its core principles. Robert Sterling was given a quiet, unceremonious retirement. Ashley was terminated, her position eliminated in the corporate restructuring. The company my Sarah and I had built was safe, but there was one last piece of business to attend to. A few weeks later, I asked Marcus to meet me, not in the boardroom and not at my house, but in the heart of the company, the main workshop where it had all begun. He arrived looking like a hollowed-out version of himself. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by a quiet, beaten-down shame. He stood amidst the scent of sawdust and varnish, a ghost in the place where I had spent the best years of my life. I didn't offer him a chair. I am not going to give you money, son, I began, my voice even without anger. I am not going to give you a management position. You have proven you don't understand the value of either. I pointed to an empty workbench in the corner where a set of old hand-worn tools was laid out. But I will offer you an opportunity, a chance to start over. You can have a job here as an apprentice, earning an apprentice's wage. You will sweep the floors. You will learn to measure twice and cut once. You will learn the difference between taking what others have built and creating something with your own two hands. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of despair and a tiny flickering spark of something else. This is your chance to build something real, I told him. Not a life, not a career, just a simple, honest wooden box. And if you can learn to do that with integrity, then maybe you can start to rebuild yourself. The choice is yours. I left him standing there alone with the tools and the silence. The seasons turned. The harsh winter gave way to a gentle spring, and the rose bushes Sarah had planted began to bloom again, their crimson petals a welcome splash of color against the old wood of the house. I spent my days in the workshop, not as a man hiding from the world, but as a craftsman enjoying his craft. The company was in Imani's capable hands, and my home was once again a sanctuary of peace. One quiet afternoon, as I sat on the porch swing, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Marcus. There were no words. It was just a photograph. The picture was of a small, simple chair made of pine, a beginner's project. I could see the imperfections, the slightly uneven legs, the joints that weren't perfectly flush. But I could also see the honest work. I saw the carefully sanded edges, the tight fit of the mortise and tenon joints, the respect for the grain of the wood. It wasn't just a chair, it was an apology, it was a promise. It was the first sentence in a new conversation spoken in the only language that mattered now, the language of our shared craft. It was a start. And as I looked at the photo of that simple, imperfect, beautiful chair, a genuine smile touched my lips. The past was not forgotten, but for the first time it felt like the future was finally being built again on a foundation of respect. Dignity is not a fragile thing that can be taken by another's disrespect. It is a fortress you build within yourself, brick by brick with every act of integrity. We live in a world that is obsessed with inheritance, yet so often confuses wealth with worth. A home's true value is not found in its market appraisal, but in the memories built within its walls. The real measure of a legacy is not the money you leave behind for your children, but the principles you leave within them. For those who only see the price of things will never truly understand the value of anything. Thank you for listening to my story. It was not a journey I ever expected to take at my age, but it taught me that it is never too late to stand up for your own legacy. I'm curious to know what you think. What is the most important lesson a parent can pass on to their children? I would be honored to read your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are many more stories waiting to be told. Finally, let me know what city or country you're listening from. It fills my heart to know how far a single voice can travel. Thank you for being here.